I'll start, I'll talk as loudly as I can, and then, but the truth is that we're actually going to start with some chavruta learning today, so that's okay, because I'm not going to say a lot. I want to hear you speak to one another. So I gave you this source sheet. We have a really interesting exchange in our parsha this week, and it's at the burning bush scene when God calls Moses through the bush, and Moses, you might think, thank you so much, Rabbi, you might think that Moses, is that better? Okay, great. You might think that Moses would be very excited to be called to service, but he's kind of the opposite of that. He's really resistant to being called to service, and he comes up with a number of excuses. In fact, there are 5 of these specific excuses that he brings, and then God responds in kind to each one of them. And so that might tell us a little bit about Moses' character, and we're going to see if we can tease out something about that. Maybe it also says something about leadership and assuming leadership positions. And so what I want to do is invite you to turn to your neighbor, find a small group near you, 2 people, 3 people, not more than 4 is usually pretty good, but find people around you, and we're going to spend a few minutes looking through these. I didn't give you the entire text because it's too much text, so I gave you like the first verse. In most cases, actually, God's response is pretty quick. Sometimes it goes on for a few verses. So hang on, before you start, just here are your instructions. You'll see it's divided by Q1, A1, right? So first challenge, first question, second, first response, and then so on and so forth. And what I want you to do is you can look at those guiding questions at the bottom of the back side of the sheet. What can this exchange teach us about assuming positions of leadership? Implicit in that is, what does it tell us about Moses and his particular approach, his particular character? And then, do you think you'd react similarly to Moses in this moment? If not, if differently, how would you react and why? Okay, so those are the questions to think about. We'll spend probably about 10 minutes in Chavruta going through this, and maybe 7 minutes, 7 to 10 minutes, and then we'll come back together and we'll do a few kind of closing thoughts. Sound good? Any questions? All right, as they say in rabbinic literature, tashma, go and learn.
How many disasters have we fallen on? And you can use for example,
All right, this is your 2-minute warning. 2-minute warning.
That's the same.
So let's wrap up.
You may not want the person to leave. What do they want to do?
All right, so as we come back together, one of the things I love the most is when this Beit Midrash is filled with the buzz of learning. That was very much in mind when we named this a Beit Midrash. This is a place not only of prayer and of volunteerism and of community and eating and all these things that we do in this multi-use space, but also a place of learning. So the flexible walls make it difficult to put bookshelves in here, but sort of imagine yourselves surrounded by rows of books, and it definitely felt like we're in a Beit Midrash with the buzz of learning. So we're going to go through these one by one and see if we can identify what is the essential question that Moses is posing. In other words, what's his objection? And then what's God's response? And see if we can say that in essentially one sentence or less. And then I'll ask if there's maybe one or two insights that any of you had on each of these little dyads. And then we'll wrap up with a few commentaries that I brought to kind of pull it together at for the last challenge. So what's the first question that Moses is asking? If you were to summarize this? Why me, right? Who am I? Who am I? Why me? And Moses' response to that is actually, God's response to that is actually kind of interesting. What's God's response, if you would summarize it?
It's me, not you.
You're not alone. Isn't that interesting? It's not, here are the characteristics of you, Moses, that made me want to choose you. It's that I got you. Right? You're not on your own here. And God doesn't really answer the question. Any insights that your Chavruta had?
What's that? Get back here. He gives Moshe a goal. Never mind you.
Yeah.
We're in this together, and we're headed back to this mountain to worship me, and that's also.
Great. So it's I'm with you. And by the way, the place that you're standing, the reason I said it was holy ground and you had to take off your sandals and all the things that happened in the few verses before this is that this is a special mountain. This isn't any old mountain, and you're going to bring the people back here. So I'm also establishing not only you as a leader, but this as a sacred place where eventually Torah is going to be received, right? The Ten Commandments. Yes, Sally?
Also, maybe he understands that Moses will be the kind of person who will trust his insights, his help, who will be responsive to that.
And you're saying that's kind of implied by the response, is that God trusts Moses to have the right insights. So in some ways, like identifying the right leader is maybe even more important than whether they have the right resume, in a way. I'm putting words in your mouth, but...
I think Moses has the capacity to stay in this conversation with God and take his advice along the way, rather than just go and do it.
Okay, so for those who couldn't hear, that Moses has the ability to kind of take God's advice along the way. Great. Maybe one more comment on this pair before we go on? Bonnie? Okay, that Moses has to have some faith, and it seems like Moses is not there yet, and he brings, to transition to our second question, our second challenge, he brings another question. If you could summarize this one, what would this one be?
Who are you?
Who are you? Great, so if the first one is who am I, then the second response is, well, who are you to be telling me this? And what's God's response? So God actually answers the question, this time maybe a little more directly, kind of. God answers the question, and God answers the question by identifying God's self, right? I am this God, right? And who is it? Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I will be that I will be. Thus you shall say that Ehyeh, I will be, sent me. Now, is that God's name? Well, kind of. It is, right? So what's God's proper name? It's Yud He Vav He, which seems to derive from the same shoresh, the same root verb meaning lihiot, to be. So if we could define God, and it's dangerous territory to try to define God, but the way we might define God in Jewish tradition is the ultimate beingness of the universe. God is the source of existence. God is existence itself. And so it makes sense that God would offer in the future tense here, ehyeh, right? I am the one who is becoming. Okay? It's kind of a beautiful riff on God's own name. Yeah, Gary.
So the answer to the first question, he says, I will be with you, Ehyeh. And then here he says his name is Ehyeh, Sher Ehyeh.
Right?
So it's there twice. But the whole thing then implies that, trust me.
Trust me. Yeah, there's a lot of like, trust me in this. That is true. And Moses seems a little resistant to that. And in fact, I didn't give you all of the verses, but if you were to read in the text, it's not just verse 14, but it's actually verse 14 all the way through verse 22. God says, here's my name, or at least some version of my name, but also, I've been at this for a while, you should just know. I got to know your ancestors, and I actually had a relationship with them too, but the thing I didn't share with them that I'm sharing with you is what? Actually, my proper name. So they knew me, but they knew me as Almighty, right? They knew me as El Shaddai, but they didn't know me as like my proper name, the way you're going to know me. So there's a little bit of foreshadowing of the particularly intimate relationship that Moses is going to have with God. And we were talking in the Parsha class this morning about how it's interesting that at the scene of the burning bush, when God begins to talk to Moshe, he's so overwhelmed that he hides his face, because Moses' face and God's face actually play really important roles in the story of this relationship. That there's all this question of like, showing the face, hiding the face. Moses has to veil his face after he has this ecstatic encounter with God. God says, you can't see my face, but then it says at the end of Moses' life that they knew each other panim al panim, that they knew each other face to face. So what's going on? There's something about faces and intimacy, the revealed and the hidden between these two characters. And then we get to question 3. So what's the third challenge? How would you summarize that? The first one was, who am I? The second one is, who are you? The third one is what? What's the question? Or the people will what? Yeah, right. What if they don't believe me?
Are you crazy?
Are you crazy? What if they don't believe me? So fine, maybe I might be the guy for the job. You seem to know what you're doing, but Pharaoh's not going to listen. It doesn't really matter, right? And what's God's response to that?
What do you have in your hand?
Here are some tricks. I'm going to give you some tools. One of them you already have in your hand, right? This staff. And there are some nifty tricks that you're going to do with this staff. But there are some other things that are also like you can do this magic trick with your hand that can look like it has tzara'at and then put it back and then it doesn't. So in other words, Pharaoh is what? What were you going to say?
I was going to say that Moses is a shepherd, so he already kind of knows how to lead people. Or lead.
Aha, so maybe God's response is, hey Moses, you're a shepherd. That's not an accident. I'm looking for shepherds. You may not have read the job description carefully enough, but I'm looking for a shepherd. And that's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to spend the next 40 years leading this people as you would lead your flock through the wilderness. Beautiful, beautiful. Any other thoughts on the response? Yeah, Ben.
It may be a little bit more than that. It may be that God is saying to him, if you can lead a flock of sheep, which clearly that's what you do, then you can lead people. It's not easy to lead sheep.
It's not, I mean, I've never I've tried to lead people, and that's really hard. I've never tried to lead sheep, but you're saying it actually is hard to be a shepherd. That's probably, I mean, I think every job is hard from the, you just assume every other job is easier than the one you have, but actually being a shepherd probably is hard. And there's the whole midrashic tradition about Moses as an especially good shepherd who pays attention to every sheep. Great. Maybe one other thought on this Q3. I'm sorry, yeah, the third question or challenge. Okay, so let's go to the fourth one. What is the challenge that Moshe brings now? How would you summarize this one?
His ability to speak.
I don't have the skills that you need.
There you go. I'm not much of a talker. What does this mean? I don't have, the words. We hear this a couple of different ways. In this version it says, Ki kvad peh uchvad lashon. I'm heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. Elsewhere, Moses says, I'm araus fatayim, I'm a man of uncircumcised lips. That shows up again in next week's parasha. So somehow he doesn't have the ability, there's this tradition of maybe he had a stammer or a speech impediment, maybe it was caused by something that happened to him when he was younger, or maybe it's not about his ability to speak literally, but it's about he doesn't feel that he has the words, or he doesn't feel he has the capacity to lead with his words in that way. Those are interesting questions. Tim, what's God's response to that?
I made you, so I know.
Yeah, right, exactly. I don't know, those of us who are parents, there is a way, I think, that sometimes we look at our children and we think, you know what, I know something about you that you don't yet know about yourself. And you may not have figured that out yet. It's going to take you a while. But I did bring you into the world. And I have confidence that you are going to be the human that I think you're capable of being and becoming. So there's a little bit of I made you. And if I didn't think you would do it, honestly, I wouldn't ask. I've got other things to do, I'm God. So God might be starting to lose a little bit of patience here, and you get a sense in this response that a little bit of a simmer is happening. Who do you think you are? I made the entire universe. Yeah, Sharon.
Yeah, when we talked about this as a little bit of a contract negotiation, and this is the kind of a little bit of you owe me thing, or this is what I gave you, and so you owe me. I don't know. Is that too dark?
I don't know. I'm not. Do you see that in the text here? Maybe. I guess if it's I brought you into the world, I can take you out. Maybe there's a little bit of that.
Yeah, we're in that space right now. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a sense of right, and that's a lovely idea. We say elsewhere in the Torah that we're supposed to, what is it? Uvacharta b'chayim, right? So I'm going to set before you blessing and curse, life and death. Uvacharta b'chayim, choose life. And you think, what does it mean to choose life? You're already alive. And maybe something in that you're getting at, Sharon, is to choose life is actually to be appreciative of the life that we have, right? Because we're not actually starting the life when we do that. We're just actualizing the life that we've already been given. So perhaps there's something in that. That's beautiful. Yes, one more comment here. Thanks, Miriam.
I think the fact that God wouldn't answer at the first, saying, "This is why I want you. You care about justice. You're a shepherd." Meanwhile, so Moses is still going on okay, but there's this about me and that about me, and God, instead of now saying, "Well, draft your brother. He's glib of tongue," right? He doesn't say that till later, and. If this is sort of a job interview, Moses is actually acing it now.
You think so?
I think he is.
Why? So, for those who couldn't hear, Miriam is arguing that Moses is acing the interview. All right, go ahead.
He's acing it because throughout, we're going to see on and on and on, Moses is concerned about the actual state of the people, the actual situation on the ground.
Yeah.
And he always keeps bringing that to God instead of just saying whatever you say, right? And at the same time, at the end of the day, he does what God says. So, it's setting up that dynamic that's going to play out, which I don't think is really comfortable for either of them.
Great. All right, so I'll try to summarize what Miriam said for those who couldn't hear, that she thinks Moses is acing this because Moses is sort of aware of this dynamic between him and God, and there are places where you want to push back on your new boss or your prospective boss, and places where you want to sort of indicate that actually you are willing to follow direction, and that he seems to be really good at that, and maybe he actually knows more about what he's doing here than he's letting on. Am I getting that?
Just the dynamic. I don't think
Or he understands the dynamic of the relationship.
He's not acing it on purpose.
You think he's just, I get it. So he's saying, I'm really not the man for the job, but by saying that, he's actually revealing that he's exactly the man for the job, because God seems to get him. Okay, beautiful. That's really
It's
interesting.
I need
I need practical tools. And then God says, okay, here's the staff, and here's the magic trick with the tzara'at, and here's the, and now a good segue to the last challenge, which is, here is your brother. So what's the last challenge that he brings? How would you summarize this one? I really, really, really don't want to do this. Please don't make me do this. Like, Moses is out of actual excuses at this point, right? I just send somebody else. Isn't there someone else in the world who would do a better job than I would? I could think of like lots of people who would do a better job than I would. And what is God's response to that?
You'll have support.
Yeah, first, now God really loses it, right? God's angry. And the text even tells us God's angry. God's frustrated. God's had enough. Like, I'm kind of done with this conversation. You know, I've indulged you long enough. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to give you a co-chair. Don't worry. You don't actually have to chair this whole thing on your own. I'll bring you a co-chair. He's going to be your brother Aaron. Aaron can speak for you with me. And that seems to be what happens. Any thoughts that you had on this final exchange? And then I'll bring you just a couple of quick commentaries. Yes, Emily, and then we'll go, and Naomi. Yeah.
So we were talking about the fact that God could have just transferred this to Aaron, right? We could speak and Moses doesn't want to do it, but we have to do it together. Moses and Aaron have to do it together. We have to stay together. And God and Moses have to do it together too, right? God obviously can't do this on God's own, or God wouldn't leave Moses, and Moses would do it on Moses' own. God imposed that Moses gets Aaron and leave each other.
I love it. So in some ways what we're seeing laid out here is how the entire thing is achieved through partnership, whether it's God and Moses partnership or Moses and Aaron partnership. But that actually what we can glean from this is that none of us really does any leadership task alone. We need someone else. Maybe it's one other person, maybe it's a group of people. I love that. Great, like, where's David Roca? There you go. Like, great thing for board training one day. Like, that's beautiful. Naomi, you were going to say something.
What I find so troubling at the end of the day is, at the end of the Parashat, God says, and it's not going to work. He tells them right up front that you're going to hit a brick wall.
Great. So hold that thought, and that will be kind of the last comment I bring here. Because I'm going to suggest actually it's going to work, but not maybe in the way we might have expected. So with thanks to Melissa Carpenter, a colleague, a renewal colleague, who compiled a few of these sources on this last exchange, here are a few observations on this last exchange that I found particularly interesting. So when Moses says, basically, send anybody but me, Professor Nechama Leibovich, Zichronah Livracha, a longtime Bible scholar, professor at Hebrew University, writes this about the last objection. She calls this essentially a blank refusal, right? Almost a desperate rebuttal, as if all of his arguments had been silenced and he was left with a barren, bewildered no. So that's what this last one is. He's not thinking about anything other than just no. And since he says just no, God has to then say, no, you don't get to say no. You understand, I'll try to indulge all of these different arguments that you're making, but at the end of the day, this is what you were called to do. I am the one calling you to do it. Leaders have to lead. You're going to be a leader, and this is your task. And that's hard, but I think there is something about leadership, and we think about like moments of extraordinary leadership in human history. Sometimes these are grand gesture moments. Most often, I think they're actually much more subtle moments, right? Think about the role of the midwives in continuing the population of the Hebrews, even when they were told not to do it, right? Think about those who were functioning within the camps in the Shoah. There are so many ways that soft power can be exercised to demonstrate leadership, not just hard power, but sometimes you're called to a task that you really don't want to do, and you just understand deep in your bones, you still have to do it. You still have to do it. Second of three that I want to end with, another perspective is that this might be a sign of Moshe's humility. We're told that Moses is exceedingly humble, that he's anav me'od, and this might be an example of that. So this is brought by the Ramban Nachmanides, who says that Moses is essentially saying, I believe that I am the very least qualified person to do this task. Okay? Now the thing about humility is it's not necessarily about making yourself small. I would actually argue that it's not about making yourself small, but it is about recognizing your limitations. And at least at this moment, Moses doesn't feel that he is actually able to do this job. I got a call from a headhunter. I'm not going to tell you who, but I got a call from a headhunter last week for a job that at first blush, I said, I am in no way qualified to do this job. Right now, I actually might be, I'm not sure, but like sometimes when we're first confronted with a leadership opportunity, the response that we have is, I definitely can't do this. And that doesn't mean that Moses thinks badly of himself. It just means that he's a realist, right? I've been a shepherd. And I've been like, I don't know, a lodge brat at Pharaoh's palace, and I come from a people of slaves, but I've never led a human people through the wilderness. And the last thing, I'll close with this, comes from the 19th century contemporary, the modern commentator, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who, like Naomi was suggesting, says that actually this is going to be a really difficult path to succeeding. That actually I don't think it's practical to succeed. And what Hirsch writes is ultimately the mission will be accomplished, but if somebody else were to do it, it would be done much faster. So he's not saying I can't do the job. He's saying I can do the job, but there's going to be a learning curve. I'm going to have to fake it till I make it. Don't you want to send somebody who's just more of a natural for this? Okay? And the response to that is, well, I know better than you, and we're going to stop discussing this. And okay, I'm going to get you some help. I'm going to ask your brother to come and partner with you so that you don't have to do it alone. And over time, Moses, who is aral sfatayim, who's kvad peh, right, who is a heavy tongue, who doesn't have the words, guess what? By the end of the Torah, he becomes an ish devarim. He becomes a man of words. The entire, like a fifth of the Torah is him speaking to the people on the banks of the Jordan River. So he does find his voice. He clearly is able to lead. He just doesn't know it yet. And guess what, Naomi? He's right. Like, maybe somebody else could have done this a little more quickly. Maybe it wouldn't have taken Pharaoh's refusal 10 times before finally we get to the point where the people are liberated and they are able to. And maybe if somebody else had been in charge, it would have taken the 2 years that we thought it was going to take at the beginning of their journey, but not the 40 years that it ends up taking, because perhaps he could have done some things better. We'll never know. It's hard to prove a negative, but in the end, he is successful. He does lead them to the border of the Promised Land. He is able to move them forward. And it seems that God knew what God was doing, because we're all here to talk about it today. Shabbat Shalom. We're going to end there, and we're going to go to Musaf, page 183 and 184. Please rise for Chatzikah.